Morning, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Tim Hall. I'm the pastor here at Gungahlin Anglican's Forward Congregation. It's my pleasure to be talking on Luke chapter 7 this morning. We're doing our theme for this year at Gungahlin Anglican is engaging, and we're doing a series from Luke's Gospel on how Jesus engages with people and how people engage with Jesus. And today's title is Engaging Authority. Let's pray as we come to look at this. Father, as we look at your word, we ask that by your Spirit you would make it come alive in us, that you would help us to submit to your authority lovingly, willingly, because you are the great King, the compassionate King. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Aussies have never dealt well with authority. Call it the convict spirit, if you like. Call it whatever you will. Our recent events here have shown so much. If anyone's involved with this, I'm not got anything against you. But, generally speaking, why are the protesters here? Well, they don't trust the government. They don't trust the doctors. They don't trust the scientists. They don't trust the authorities. And there may be different levels of that, and different people might be in different groups there. But the idea is that they don't trust authority, right? I mean, this is nothing new. We're known in Australia as one of the most egalitarian, that is like socially flat, socially level societies in the world. My senior theology lecturer at college, he lectured in the US for a time, and over there he was called Dr. Maddock or Professor Maddock, and he had to get used to, when he came back to Australia, very quickly it became Mad Dog. And in Australia, he would get called Mad Dog Maddock. We're a very different society, say, to the US. We don't trust authority. We don't trust the political authorities because they've lied so often. We don't trust economic authorities because the financial markets collapsed. We don't trust religious authorities because they've failed to act swiftly against abuse in the church. We don't trust scientific authorities because the products resulting from their discoveries in many cases have devastated communities and the environment and all kinds of different things. And then we add that in our own time, factors like the 24-hour news cycle and social media and Netflix biopics, and I could go on. No wonder there's an erosion of trust in our society. So then, we're talking about Jesus' authority. This guy, Jesus of Nazareth, comes on the scene. And we've already seen in the chapters before this that people are amazed. Why? Because he carries himself as one with authority. Authority to teach God's law and teach God's will. Authority over all kinds of disease and evil and even nature. Even in one of the preceding chapters, he claimed the authority to be able to forgive sins. So the question before us as we look at this passage today is, can we trust Jesus' authority? How is Jesus going to express this authority? And Luke chapter 7, 1 to 17 is going to help us to answer that question. We're going to simply look at the two events in this chapter, or in this first part of this chapter, that involve Jesus' authority. And his authority here is a sign of who he is. And then we're going to see what that has to do with us. So firstly, we see that Jesus heals a Gentile centurion slave in verses 1 to 10. A bit of context. Jesus has just finished his big sermon, what they call in Luke the Sermon on the Plain or the Sermon on the Level, and really covers the same material as the better-known Sermon on the Mount in Matthew's Gospel. There's an important pattern in the Gospels where Jesus teaches, and he basically says, I've got authority, as he teaches, and then he backs up that authority with what he does, with miracles. And it goes back and forth between the two. So he's just done the speech part, and now he's going to back it up. The two work together to point to who Jesus is. And that's important for what's going on here. Jesus and his disciples, they head to Capernaum, which is on the northwest shore of Galilee. And it's actually Jesus' main centre of teaching for the 3 years that he was ministering. It's not a huge town. I've been there. I've seen it. Well, I've seen the remains of it. There's not much left these days. But it's the sort of place, you can imagine, I grew up in the country in the sort of town where you get home and mum would say, "What were you doing at midday at the post office?" And I go, "How did you know I was there?" Well, everyone knows everyone, and everyone knows what everyone is doing. So even the Roman soldiers who have been posted to this, what they probably would say, this backward outpost in the middle of nowhere, they know the citizens. They're part of the community. They have no choice. They have to be part of the community. And they're doing this to earn their citizenship, most likely. If you served in the army for long enough, you could become a Roman citizen. Jesus hasn't been there long when some elders, and that's talking about some civic leaders in the town rather than religious leaders, and they approach him with a request. The local centurion's slave is sick. And they say, "Well, this centurion, he's a good guy. He treats us well. He even treats his slave well. And he likes us. He likes us Jewish people. He even threw some coin in to get our synagogue built. This is a good guy. You ought to help him." But as they're heading for the centurion's house, it seems it becomes clear that the centurion actually didn't think Jesus would come over. So he sends another party. He thought that Jesus would just do something from a distance. And this time it's a group of personal friends, someone maybe on his own sort of level in terms of class structure and that sort of thing. And they can relay to Jesus the exact words that he's saying. And we can see that in verses 6 to 8. If you've got it in front of you, you can see it with me. So Jesus went with them. He wasn't far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, "Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. And that is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and this one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." So we've got this Roman soldier stuck in this backwater town. He didn't want Jesus to come into his house, right? He wouldn't mix with this lower class. No, that's not what he says at all, is it? Verse 6, he says, "I don't deserve to have you come under my roof." Verse 7, "I didn't even consider myself worthy to come to you." This Roman soldier sees himself as below Jesus, not worthy of even meeting him. And indeed, we actually never get to meet this guy. We get a story about him, but he never appears in the story at all. We only see him through his friends. But of course, there's another side to this. He sees something more about Jesus. Look at verse 8 again. "I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me." Now, given what he goes on to say, and I've got to admit this confused me for ages, you might expect him to have said, "I am a man with authority. I am a man who has authority, because I can tell this soldier go there and he goes there. I can tell this guy go there and he goes there. I can tell this slave go and get me something from the shops and he'll do it." Let me try and help us sort this out a bit. What's the difference between power and authority? If I stand out in the middle of the intersection at Gundaroo Road and Horse Park Drive and I hold up my hand, what's going to happen? I'm probably going to get run over. That's right, yeah. Depends who's driving. I won't go into that. Thanks, Graham. But if a uniformed AFP officer does the same thing and he goes out there in his uniform, in his high vis, and he puts up his hand, what's going to happen? Hopefully, the cars will listen to him. The cars will do what he says. Why? What's the difference between me and him? Well, neither of us have the physical power to stop a car, but he has authority to do that. And he has authority given to him as a police officer. That's the difference. See, the uniform he wears, that represents that. It says that the federal government gives me the authority to stop traffic with my hand. And the only reason the centurion can order around his soldiers and his slaves is because he's been given authority from someone up higher to do that. His uniform, then, is a display of that authority. And likewise with Jesus, the centurion is saying that he can see that Jesus not only has the power to heal his servant, the ability to do that, but that he has been given the authority, the go-ahead, the clearance to do just that. Now, of course, this is where the illustration breaks down, isn't it? Because we know from our theology that Jesus is equal with the Father and the Spirit, but we also know from Luke's Gospel here that the Father is sending Jesus into the world to do what he's doing. And we also know from Jesus' baptism that he is empowered by the Spirit to do what he is doing. He comes with authority. So that's the first story. We see a theme that keeps coming up again and again in Luke's Gospel, and that is, by all means, by all logic, this Roman, Gentile, high-class, likely rich guy shouldn't get it, but he does. And his faith in who Jesus is flies in the face of the Pharisees who are blind to who Jesus really is. Now, we don't see the Pharisees in this chapter, but Red talked about them last week when they were nitpicking at every little thing that Jesus did. And we see that Jesus' authority to heal a child is just by the power of his word. Now, I wonder what that makes you think of. Here's what it makes me think of. Who can make things happen just by the power of his word? It makes me go right back to the start of the Bible, to Genesis chapter 1, where God creates the universe. How? By the power of his word. God speaks and it happens. This is an amazing thing that is happening here. Jesus is the one who has power to heal by his word. And Jesus is the one also we see here who has compassion to heal. In this case, a non-believing Gentile who was associated with his people's oppressors. So the second story in verses 11 to 17, we see Jesus raise a Jewish widow's dead son. A different story, a different location in a place called Nain, which is back towards Nazareth. And we see in verses 12 to 13, as he approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a large crowd from the town was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." Strange thing to say at a funeral, hey? There's some important details here. This is the woman's only son, and she's a widow. Why is that important? Well, we've got to remember that this is a place and a time without welfare. There's no safety net. She's already lost her husband. Now she's lost her son. This is a time where it's very hard for a woman to make it on their own. So this woman is already in big trouble in this patriarchal world. And it's likely she would either end up begging or having to sell herself into slavery in order to live. But then the most amazing thing happens. Verse 14. Then he went up and touched the bier. Do you know what a bier is? And it's not a can that you drink. I admit that I didn't know what it is until I looked it up myself. It's not a closed-in coffin, but a bed on which the dead body lays, like this. So what does that mean? It means, according to Jewish law, when Jesus went up and touched the bier, he immediately made himself ceremonially unclean. Something is happening, and we are meant to sit up and pay attention at the moment. Jesus is demonstrating his authority again. And notice this time, unless we think that the quality of our faith is what makes Jesus act, which we could get from the first one, the guy is commended for his faith, this is completely unprompted. The widow doesn't even acknowledge Jesus, let alone show faith in him. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that she's portrayed as faithless, more just oblivious to what's going on. This just happens suddenly. But what it does then is it amplifies the point that Jesus is acting purely out of his compassion. The text says his heart goes out to her. He sees this poor woman in need and his heart goes out to her. The rest of verse 14. So he touched the bier, they were carrying him on, and the bearer stood still. He said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. Now, this is a bit of a morbid sort of question or illustration, but I don't know if you've ever tried telling a dead body to do something. It's pretty unlikely, I'm guessing, in our society. We're kind of separated from death in a lot of ways. But if you did, people might start mumbling about you. Well, they mumbled about Jesus too. You can see it in the verses that follow. But they don't mumble for the same reasons they might mumble about you. They mumble about Jesus because they've just seen something amazing. They were all filled with awe and they praise God. A great prophet has appeared among us, they said. God has come to help his people. A prophet. Well, surely more than that. I wanted to say more than that. The Messiah has come, right? But if we go back to the Old Testament, we can see that this has happened before. Elisha, the prophet, did something very similar where he raised the Shunammite woman's son from the dead. So it's not unreasonable then for these people to think something like this is happening again. This is exciting times. And of course, Jesus is a prophet, isn't he? He's much more than that, but he's certainly not less than that. So these guys are certainly seeing some aspect of Jesus and understanding something about him. In the first instance, we saw Jesus reach out with compassion to a rich, Gentile, upper-class soldier. And here we get the opposite. Jesus' heart goes out to a poor Jewish widow. And these things are a demonstration of Jesus' authority for a purpose, as I said at the start. They're part of his revealing who he is. He is God's Messiah. That is God's King. That's what that means. Sent not to overthrow the Romans, but to invite them into his kingdom. A kingdom where there is no sickness, a kingdom where there is no death, a kingdom with a good, compassionate king. Jesus' miracles are part of the proclamation that God's king has arrived. And Jesus reaching out in these miracles then, in a sense, Jesus is saying, have a taste of the kingdom. See what it's like. See how good it is. It's Jesus inviting people in. Well, it might make us ask the question, who then is invited into this kingdom? Who does the good news of God's forgiveness, because that's really a summary of what God's kingdom's about, who does that extend to? Well, we see here that God's kingdom extends to both the rich and the poor, to both the Jew and the Gentile, to both soldiers and kings and peasants and servants. And the point of the two polar opposite examples here is that Jesus' kingdom is for all who would see Jesus for who he is. For all who would see him as he truly is, as the centurion did, as the crowd at the funeral did, or at least started to. And now I know I've always got to be careful with passages like this. I don't want people to go away thinking that Jesus is going to answer all your prayers all the way you want if you have enough faith. I don't want you to expect healing miracles and then walk away from Jesus if he says no to those prayers. I do want us to pray for those things expectantly. But I want to say a few things. Firstly, I want to say that miracles are actually pretty rare in the Bible. Over a period of around 2,000 years, there are only sort of three clusters of miracles. One around Moses and the Exodus, one around Elijah and Elisha, and the third around Jesus and the apostles. Now, do I think miracles happen today sometimes? Yes, I do. But I think that God is the one in control of that, not us. I think Jesus' miracles at this time served a special purpose at a special time, and that was to show us what God's king looks like and what God's kingdom is like, which is something we're looking forward to, and it's not fully realized yet. It's not complete. The second thing I think we can learn from this is while we're not Jesus ourselves, we are not the Messiah, we're called to follow in his steps. We're called to go where he goes, to do what he does, to represent him to the people around us. And for the purposes of this passage, that means having the same attitude as Jesus. It means taking the gospel to all peoples, what we call the Great Commission. It means showing the heart of Jesus to everyone, but particularly to the vulnerable. Now, we were discussing at one of our mandatory training events the other day. I think Jenny was there and she's here today. That because of the sins of the world, we are really all on a kind of a scale of vulnerability, aren't we? That means that at times we will all be vulnerable. At times we will have needs, and at times we will be helping others. And depending on what we're going through, practically, today you might be the one showing compassion to someone who has vulnerability, and tomorrow you might be the one receiving that compassion because you've suddenly found yourself in a vulnerable position. All it can take is a phone call to change that situation. That happened to my family 7 odd years ago now. It's a while ago now when we got the phone call from the doctor to say your 5-year-old son has cancer. We didn't have a house at the time. We didn't know what we were doing at the time. And our world just turned upside down immediately. We went from caring for people to the ones who needed to be cared for straight away. That was the time, by the way, we moved to this church and we were greatly cared for. And I'm very proud of my church to be able to say that. Not in a prideful way, of course, that the Bible condemns, but in a good way. By the way, for anyone who's new here, our son's fine now. I probably should add that so that you're not thinking about that. See, I know some people don't like receiving help. I know it's usually easier to give help for a lot of people than to receive it. But I want to say, if that is you, just think carefully, because often that can be a matter of pride. In other words, we like to think we can do it on our own, or we don't want to let other people know that we can't do it on our own. And that's just a straight out lie. And it's completely hostile to the whole idea of Christianity, where every week we come together and we admit our helplessness before a holy God, where every week we admit that we can't do it on our own and we ask for God's help. We can't do it on our own, even for a week, even for a day, even for an hour. We need to be able to ask for the help to live the life that we can't. And God's chosen means of supplying the help that we need is his church. Look around you. I mean that, look around you. These are the people who are the answer to your prayers. So here we see Jesus showing his authority as the Messiah and as the Son of God, so that we can see who he is, so that we can see what the kingdom of God is like. So we can see that all are welcome to enter God's kingdom under the loving and compassionate rule of a good king. And we see here an example set for us too. An example to take the good news of God's kingdom to everyone, not just those people who we see down the street and we think, oh, wouldn't it be great if that person became a Christian? But to also the person that we struggle to talk to. It's an example to replicate Jesus' compassion to those our society forgets. Let me finish by asking this: can we trust Jesus' authority? Well, I would say the one who on one hand has the power to say the word and it will happen, and on the other hand, whose heart breaks for the broken. There is no authority more worthy of your continued trust.